He thought it might be one of the watchers, who were often seen in this length of coast range. Forms that look human to human eyes, but are certainly not human. They come from behind ridges and watch. Big Sur. Located on California's central coast between Carmel and San Simeon, it's a unique part of the American coastline where the rugged Santa Lucia Mountains rise dramatically from the Pacific Ocean. The earliest inhabitants of the area were the three native tribes known as the Ohlone, Esselen, and Salinan. Later, Spanish settlers arrived from Europe and established themselves in the area. During this period of settlement, the legend of the Dark Watchers was born. Known to Spanish settlers as Los Vigilantes Oscuros, which translates to English as the Dark Watchers, the figures were thought to be supernatural watchmen who were present to benevolently oversee the progress of the Spanish settlements. Los Vigilantes Oscuros became figures of legend passed down through generations of the Spanish inhabitants of California, with the tales being told to Americans as the country expanded west into California. Although very similar in description to the so-called shadow people of paranormal lore, these Dark Watchers seem to have their own unique traits. It could be said that the Dark Watchers are a subcategory of the ubiquitous shadow people. The Watchers are very aloof and remain stationary, and generally they tend to keep their distance from the people they observe. Shadow people, however, are often seen moving through the environment, a fleeting glimpse of one walking down the hall or peering around a corner. The shadow people are also generally seen indoors, whereas the Dark Watchers are normally seen outdoors, usually observed on the ridges of hills and mountains or other natural features. The following is a series of sightings around Big Sur and other locations. Early one morning when my car was in the shop, my sister was driving me to work in Salinas over San Juan Grade Road. We were coming home to the San Juan Bautista Holista side when we saw a very large dark figure standing at the edge of the mountains, which is extremely weird since I've never seen anyone cross over the barbed wire fence, and I travel that road daily and at all hours. We drove slowly behind the figure, noticing it staring off into the distant valleys and mountains towards Fremont Peak. It appeared to have a large cape with straight shoulders that were very broad. It seemed to have a hunch on its back. At first, from a distance, I thought it was a condor, but when I got closer, it stood almost 10 feet tall. I did not notice us driving behind it, but when we found a spot on the cliffy road to turn around and get a better look, it was gone. This was around September 2010. I saw a Dark Watcher just about dusk in June of 2016. He was standing near the ocean cliffs just outside of Hearst Castle. No one could see him in our party except me. As I walked toward it, it vanished. I also had a sense of foreboding, an eerie, scary feeling. I'm a long-distance runner, and most of my training is up in the good old Californian mountains. I had a long run scheduled, so I headed out. I headed to Veterans Park here in the San Fernando Valley. The time of day was approximately 2 p.m. I was running, and up in an area where no human could climb without gear, I saw a black figure in plain daylight. I had never seen anything like that up in the mountains. It was darker than dark, and I could not explain it. I've seen beings like this in the forests in England. I dubbed them the Watchers before I knew that they were a thing. They didn't feel malevolent or anything like that. I just got the impression they were observing. They appeared elongated, as if they were shadows of people, but nobody was casting them. A little information of the place where I saw the figure. It's a high hill next to the main street here. The hill is clearly visible from the street. Anyway, this hill is a really relaxing place, especially during the twilight, and that's why I often go there during my late walks. The incident happened 3 days ago, as I was on my way there. I was walking on the main street, and when I looked towards the hill, I saw a dark figure, almost like a shadow, standing right where I usually stand. The figure wasn't skinny or super tall. It just reminded me of a normal average man, but it was completely black. It wasn't just someone wearing all black clothes, because even then you can see some shades. But this was nothing. Even the face was just black. The hill is close enough to the street that you should be able to see some of the facial features. I was frozen in place, but not really scared, just shocked. I stared at the figure for about 5 minutes to see if it would move, but no, it just stood there in place, not moving an inch. Eventually I backed up a little bit and ran home. The next day when I visited the place, many of the weeds around the spot where he was standing were burnt. I don't think I'll be going there late anymore. I was at my home on Walker Street. It was a warm summer Wisconsin night. We lived in a kind of duplex house, but instead of side by side, the homes were top and bottom. We lived on the top home of the house. We had a nice, huge, screened-in balcony porch. That night, I was standing out on the balcony, looking towards the corner of Walker and Milton. I noticed what I thought was someone standing on the corner, underneath the street light. For some reason that I don't recall, I felt the need to keep watching. I watched it cross Milton Avenue, one of the town's busiest streets. Now it was walking down my street, but on the sidewalk on the other side of the road. As it grew closer, it moved into better lighting. The light from a different street, the light in front of my house, and the neighbours' outdoor lights from across the street. I noticed it wasn't a normal person. It was full and true figured, and walking like a human, but it was all black, like a shadow. There were no signs of clothes, shoes, facial features, nothing. Just completely dark, like a shadow, from head to toe. When the shadow person, which is always how I have described this thing, was directly across from where I was on the balcony, but still down on the sidewalk across the street, it stopped, turned, looked up, and stared at me. I got this undesirable feeling that came over me, like I never felt before or since. This creepy, odd, dreadful almost feeling came over me. It continued to stare up at me until finally I was so uncomfortable that I quickly turned and ran inside. And so it seems that there are exceptions to the rule. Some of these watchers seem to move among us, and as you will see, sometimes interact with us. In the 2014 book, In Search of the Dark Watchers, the author, Thomas Steinbeck, gives some details and advice about the watchers and makes mention of a story recounted to him by his no-nonsense grandmother, Olive. First of all, if noticed, it is imperative never to look directly at the watchers, or even stare in their general direction. It is advisable to glimpse them out of the corner of the eye and pretend to see nothing unusual at all. One should never make overt gestures like pointing or waving or even speaking in exclamations, as these signs will indicate you are aware that they are nearby. And if for a brief moment they entertain the least suspicion that this is the case, they will literally evaporate in front of your eyes like the fog. It should therefore come as no surprise that after perhaps thousands of years of purposeful evasion, the Dark Watchers have developed and perfected many unusual skills of avoidance, all of them calibrated to help secure their total freedom of movement. It has often been noted that they can blend in with virtually any environment they choose, and accomplish this to an incredibly accurate degree. These skills certainly assure the clans many clear and obvious advantages. Now, my no-nonsense grandmother, Olive, not only swore that she had seen the Dark Watchers on several occasions, but also claimed to have traded fruit, flowers and walnuts with them every now and then. And according to Olive, she received the most beautiful feathers, perfect seashells, and sweet pine nuts in return. According to Grandmother Olive, the bounty was always exchanged at a shaded alcove just east of the coast trail near Mule Deer Canyon. She would leave off modest gifts in a small basket in the same arbor on the long ride south, and then, on the trail back home at the end of her tour, she would dismount at Mule Deer Canyon, go to the alcove, and retrieve her portion of the trade. She said it was like having a simple, civilized conversation with people who were millions of years older than anyone else, yet beyond the reach of everything except their selfless gestures of generosity. According to my father, all her life his mother swore that every jot of this story was gospel, and since Olive was iron-bound concerning strict honesty, people appeared willing to believe her every word, principally because it was well known that Olive Steinbeck would never swear to anything without just cause. Also, as my father liked to recall, there was never anyone present with the courage to openly discount or disparage anything Olive said, regardless of topic or plausibility. It has long been said that the Dark Watchers are migratory in the extreme, sometimes changing their encampment every day, or every other day depending upon the availability of food and the proximity of strangers. They possess incredible hearing and impeccable eyesight. According to all accounts, the Watchers never use fire for warmth, or even to cook. Like all the other creatures they have ever observed, they eat their food raw, and waste nothing, including bones and shells. They seem physically inured to both heat and cold, since they wear minimal clothing made of an unknown material. Supposedly these people have the most remarkable olfactory capabilities, and have their very highly developed sense of smell. It is said they can identify all large animals, particularly humans, at great distances, especially if the wind is flowing in their favor. It is known that the Watchers maintain their own unique paths through the wilderness, but since they never displace the local vegetation in their migrations, their trails are all but impossible to discover, and they obviously prefer it this way. Returning once more to their exceptionally heightened sensitivity to foreign odors, it has been noted over the last decades that the Watchers have developed a sensitivity to the odors of chemically created synthetic materials, especially industrial plastics, and weatherproof coatings that emanate from all modern technology, such as binoculars, cameras, recording devices, and camping gear, and they can sense these odors at considerable distances. Like crows, they can also smell the presence of gun oil, and usually evacuate any territory where hunters are on the prowl. It has also become apparent that people purposely looking for the Dark Watchers, and there seem to be a few, are now using camouflaged game cameras and other remotely tripped recording devices of almost every description. But because these articles are also made of the same odorous plastics, the searchers have come up with virtually nothing to validate their efforts. It doesn't occur to them that their quarry can smell their cars, their gear, their campfires, their food, their plastics, and especially their toilets. So naturally, the Watchers move away at once. Steinbeck suggests in his book that the Watchers are actually a mysterious and extremely reclusive race of beings that have lived side by side with humanity throughout history. An interesting idea indeed, especially when you take into account the many thousands of reported shadow people encounters. Perhaps these Dark Watchers and the so-called shadow people are actually the same phenomenon. The similarities are obvious. And if we were to include the shadow people as dark watchers, then the theory that there is a secret and aloof race of beings living side by side with humanity starts to take on a bit more substance. I came across a very unusual story a few months ago, which I included in my Strange Times 31 video. In it, an anonymous person claims to have met and talked to a member of this secret race. I went overseas. I can't discuss where, but it was in June of this year, 2010. I saw a naked black human shape, no genitals, black egg-shaped oval eyes. It was lying on the floor. I just stood there and stared at it. It seemed to flicker into different shapes. 1 minute it was a dog, then a snake, then back to the human shape. It started speaking to me in a language I didn't recognize. Its voice was soft, in pain. It seemed to be injured. I said, "English," and it said yes. I asked it what it was, and it replied, "I'm a fireman." I asked it where it was from. It replied, "From the land you're standing on, but our fathers came from the sky." I asked it why it was lying on the floor. It replied, "Bad leg." I began to feel more comfortable, so I started throwing at it question after question. From what I understood, they're aliens from another planet, and they're made out of a gas-based substance. They can bend light to make them look like anything they want. They've been on Earth for thousands of years. The one I was talking to was a child, only 200 years old. The adults can travel through portals to any place in the universe. They don't use any technology. They're not very intelligent. I guess it's an ability they have. Just like we can walk and birds can fly, they can travel great distances. From what I understood, humans are the smartest creatures in the universe. There are other creatures on distant planets, but none that are as intelligent as us, or even come close. They like to avoid humans. There are millions of them. Whole cities could exist in a little piece of rock. They drink water, and they feed off the bones of dead animals. I had so many more questions, but he interrupted me and asked me to leave before his father comes looking for him, or I'd be in trouble. I looked around, said goodbye, then walked away and didn't look back. I will leave you with a quote from Thomas Steinbeck, from his book In Search of the Dark Watchers. As might be expected, the nagging question has always remained, how does one find these creatures? And the answer has always been the same. You don't find them, they find you.